I pulled him closer, feeling the heat radiating between us as ancient marble statues watched from the shadows. His breath was warm against my neck, and I could feel his pulse racing beneath my fingertips as they traced along his chest. "Tell me about the Renaissance again," I whispered, my voice barely audible in the empty museum hall. But we both knew history wasn't what either of us was thinking about anymore. Before we dive into this story, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And trust me, you won't want to miss where this goes. Now let's begin. The dim lighting of the museum's after-hours lecture hall cast long shadows across the marble floors as I adjusted my position in the uncomfortable wooden chair. Oscar sat 3 seats away, his dark hair catching the light from the overhead projector as Professor Martinez droned on about medieval manuscripts. I'd been coming to these weekly history group meetings for 6 months now, and while my passion for historical research brought me here initially, lately I found myself more interested in studying Oscar's profile than any ancient text. He turned his head slightly, catching me watching him, and offered that slow smile that made my stomach flutter every single time. There was something about the way he listened, not just to the lectures, but to everything, with this intense focus that made you feel like you were the only person in the room when he turned that attention on you. The influence of Byzantine art on early Renaissance painters cannot be understated, Professor Martinez continued, clicking to the next slide. I tried to focus, but Oscar had started taking notes, and I found myself mesmerized by the way his fingers moved across the page, confident and deliberate. When the lecture finally ended and the other participants began filing out, Oscar approached my seat with that easy confidence he always carried. "Walk with me?" he asked, gesturing toward the museum's main galleries. "I want to show you something." The museum felt different after hours, quieter, more intimate, with only the security lighting illuminating the corridors. Our footsteps echoed, softly as we made our way through the Renaissance wing, past paintings I'd seen dozens of times, but never quite like this, never with the weight of anticipation hanging between us. "Here," he said, stopping in front of a lesser-known Caravaggio tucked away in an alcove. "Look at the way he uses light and shadow, the chiaroscuro technique. It's like he's revealing secrets that were meant to stay hidden." I stepped closer to examine the painting, feeling the warmth of his body behind me. "The contrast is incredible," I murmured, but I wasn't really talking about the artwork anymore. The space between us seemed to crackle with electricity. "Clarissa," he said quietly, and something in his voice made me turn. The way he was looking at me, like I was something precious he'd been waiting to discover, sent heat rushing through my veins. "I've been wanting to tell you something." "What?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering with words, he stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup my cheek. "That I think about you every night after these meetings. That I've been hoping you might feel the same way." My breath caught as he leaned in, his lips barely brushing mine at first, testing, asking permission. When I didn't pull away, when I actually leaned into him, he deepened the connection, his mouth warm and sure against mine. I could taste the coffee he'd been drinking during the lecture, could feel the slight roughness of his evening stubble against my skin. My hands found their way to his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath his shirt. He made a soft sound against my lips, his arms circling my waist and pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. The kiss grew more urgent, more desperate, months of stolen glances and innocent touches finally finding their release. "God, Clarissa?" he breathed against my neck, his lips trailing along my throat. "Do you have any idea what you do to me?" I arched against him, feeling the evidence of his desire pressing against my hip. "Show me," I whispered, surprised by my own boldness. His hands moved to the buttons of my blouse, fingers working with surprising steadiness given the way his breath was coming in short bursts. "Are you sure?" he asked, pausing to meet my eyes. Instead of answering, I reached for his belt, my fingers fumbling slightly with the buckle in my eagerness. He helped me, his hands covering mine, guiding them as we worked together to remove the barriers between us. The cool marble wall pressed against my back as he lifted me slightly, my legs wrapping around his waist instinctively. The position sent waves of heat through me, every point of contact between us electric with possibility. "I've wanted this for so long," he murmured, his forehead resting against mine as we moved together in the shadows of the ancient gallery. The rhythm we found was slow at first, deliberate, like we were savoring every moment of this long-awaited connection. My fingers tangled in his hair as the intensity built between us, our movements becoming more urgent, more necessary. The sound of our breathing seemed to echo off the marble walls, mixing with the soft sounds of fabric against skin and whispered endearments. When the wave of sensation finally crashed over me, I had to bite down on his shoulder to keep from crying out, loud enough to alert the security guards. He followed moments later, his body tensing against mine as he buried his face in my neck, my name falling from his lips like a prayer. We stayed there for long moments afterward, holding each other in the darkness, our breathing slowly returning to normal. The weight of what had just happened settled between us, not uncomfortable, but significant, like we'd crossed a threshold we couldn't uncross. We should probably go, he said eventually, though he made no move to step away from me. Nodded, but found myself reluctant to break the spell of this moment. Oscar, I started, then paused, unsure how to voice what I was feeling. I know, he said softly, understanding without explanation. Me too. We dressed slowly, stealing glances at each other in the dim light, both of us seeming to realize that everything had changed between us. The easy friendship we'd cultivated over months of shared historical discussions had evolved into something deeper, more complex. As we made our way back through the museum corridors toward the exit, Oscar reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. The gesture felt both natural and revolutionary, a simple touch that acknowledged what we'd shared while promising more to come. Tomorrow's Saturday, he said as we reached the museum's front entrance. Would you like to come to my apartment? I have some research materials I think you'd find interesting. I smiled, understanding that research was probably the last thing either of us would be thinking about. I'd like that very much. The night air felt cool against my flushed skin as we stepped outside, but Oscar's hand in mine kept me warm. We walked to our cars in comfortable silence, the weight of anticipation for tomorrow already building between us. I spent that night staring at my bedroom ceiling, replaying every moment of our encounter in the museum. The way his hands had felt on my skin, the sound he'd made when I'd first touched him, the intensity in his eyes when he'd looked at me afterward. It all felt like a dream I was afraid to wake up from. By morning, nervous excitement had settled, in my stomach like butterflies. I changed outfits 3 times before settling on a sundress that was casual enough for a Saturday afternoon, but still made me feel confident and attractive. Oscar's apartment was exactly what I'd expected, filled with books and historical artifacts, but warm and inviting rather than cluttered. He answered the door wearing jeans and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking relaxed and impossibly appealing. Come in, he said, stepping aside to let me pass. Can I get you some coffee, wine, water? Coffee sounds perfect, I replied, following him into the kitchen. The domesticity of the moment felt both strange and right, like we were playing house, but also like this was exactly where we were meant to be. He moved around the kitchen with easy efficiency, and I found myself watching the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, remembering what it had felt like to have those arms around me the night before. So, he said, handing me a steaming mug, about those research materials I mentioned. I raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of the perfectly prepared coffee. Were you actually planning to show me research materials, or was that just a very intellectual way of asking me to spend the day with you? He laughed, setting down his own mug and moving closer. A little of both, actually. But right now, I'm much more interested in continuing what we started last night. His hands found my waist, pulling me against him, and I could feel the heat building between us again immediately. Is that so? I asked, looking up at him through my lashes. He murmured, his lips finding the sensitive spot just below my ear. I've been thinking about you all night, Clarissa, about the way you felt, the sounds you made. His words sent heat pooling low in my belly, and I set my coffee mug aside so I could thread my fingers through his hair. Show me what you were thinking about, I whispered. This time we had privacy, time, and a proper bed. Oscar led me to his bedroom, his hands never leaving my body as we moved through the apartment. The afternoon sunlight streaming through his windows created a warm, golden atmosphere that felt perfect for what we were about to share. He undressed me slowly this time, his fingers trailing over each inch of exposed skin, his mouth following the path his hands had traced. By the time he'd removed my dress entirely, I was trembling with need, my hands reaching for him desperately. Patience, he murmured against my collarbone, his voice rough with desire. We have all day. But patience had never been my strong suit, especially not when it came to this. I pushed him back onto the bed, climbing over him with a confidence that surprised us both. His eyes darkened as I settled myself above him, my hands bracing on his chest. My turn to show you what I was thinking about, I said, beginning to move against him with deliberate slowness. The afternoon dissolved into a haze of touch and sensation, of whispered confessions and shared desires. We explored each other with the thoroughness of dedicated researchers, learning what made each other gasp, what brought pleasure, what pushed us both over the edge. When we finally collapsed together, exhausted and satisfied, the sun was beginning to set outside his bedroom window. I lay with my head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, feeling more content than I had in months. Clarissa, he said softly, his fingers combing through my hair. I need to tell you something. I lifted my head to look at him, noting the serious expression that had replaced the satisfied smile he'd been wearing. What is it? I'm not just interested in a casual arrangement here. What I feel for you, it's not just physical attraction. I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between us, weighted with possibility and risk. I could feel my heart racing as I processed what he'd said, what it meant for both of us. Oscar, I began, then paused, trying to find the right words. I feel it too. This connection we have. It's more than I ever expected when I started coming to those history meetings. He smiled then, relief evident in his expression. So where does that leave us? I leaned down to kiss him, slow and sweet, trying to pour all of my feelings into the connection between us. It leaves us with a future to write together, I said against his lips, and I can't wait to see what that story looks like. As the evening settled around us, we talked about everything and nothing. Our hopes, our fears, our dreams for what this relationship could become. The conversation was punctuated by kisses and caresses, neither of us quite ready to break the intimate bubble we'd created. When hunger finally drove us to the kitchen for dinner, we cooked together in comfortable domesticity, stealing touches, and sharing laughter as we prepared a simple meal. The ease between us felt both new and ancient, like we'd been doing this dance for years instead of hours. After dinner, we returned to his bedroom, making love again with a tenderness that spoke to the emotional connection building between us. This time, there was no urgency, no desperate need, just the slow, sweet exploration of two people beginning to truly know each other. Later, as I lay in his arms listening to his breathing even out as he drifted toward sleep, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, Oscar had been a friend, an attractive man I admired from across a lecture hall. Tonight, he was my lover, potentially something much more significant. The thought should have terrified me. I'd always been cautious about relationships, careful to protect my heart from potential pain. But with Oscar, caution felt unnecessary. There was something about him, about us together, that made taking risks feel not just possible, but essential. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sensation of gentle kisses being pressed to my shoulder. Morning light was filtering through the windows, and Oscar was already awake, propped up on one elbow beside me. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning," I replied, stretching lazily. The movement caused the sheet to slip lower, and I caught the way his eyes tracked the motion, heat already building in his gaze despite the early hour. "I was thinking," he said, his hand tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. "Maybe we should play hooky from tomorrow's history meeting." "Oh? And what would we do instead?" I asked, though I was already arching into his touch, my body responding to his proximity with embarrassing eagerness. "I can think of a few educational activities we could pursue," he said, his lips finding my neck. "Private tutorials, hands-on research, intensive one-on-one study sessions." I laughed, but the sound caught in my throat as his mouth found that sensitive spot that made my toes curl. "That sounds like a very comprehensive curriculum," I managed to say. "I'm a very thorough teacher," he replied, and then he was showing me just how thorough he could be, his mouth and hands working together to drive coherent thought from my mind entirely. By the time we finally emerged from his bedroom, the sun was high in the sky and we were both starving. We shared breakfast in his kitchen, our feet tangled together under the table, stealing bites from each other's plates and planning our day. "I should probably go home and change clothes," I said eventually, though I was reluctant to leave the warm cocoon we'd created. "Or," Oscar said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "you could borrow something of mine and we could spend the day together. I know it's moving fast, but I don't want this weekend to end just yet." Looking into his eyes, seeing the hope and affection there, I realized I didn't want it to end either. "Okay," I said, surprising myself with how easily the agreement came. "But I'm choosing the activity." "Deal," he said immediately. "What did you have in mind?" I smiled, feeling bold and adventurous in a way that was entirely new to me. "Surprise me." The weekend stretched before us, full of possibility and promise. Whatever this was between us, this intense connection that had ignited so suddenly, I was ready to explore it fully. For once in my careful, planned life, I was ready to take a leap of faith and see where it would lead. Have you ever had a moment where everything changed in an instant? Where one conversation, one touch, completely altered the trajectory of your life? I'd love to hear about your own experiences with unexpected connections in the comments below. And if this story spoke to you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more intimate tales. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.